Well, hello everybody. I think this is my last pickling for the year. I'm going to pickle some onions using a recipe that I found online for the way that English pickled onions are done. Actually, what I'm pickling are my shallots. Harvested them maybe 2 weeks ago, not much more than 2 weeks ago, and I noticed that some of them had already started to sprout, so there aren't that many of them, but I can't stand to see them go to waste, so I'm going to try pickling them. First thing to do, I guess, that I peeled them, and they are all peeled and sitting there in water. And to determine how much water to use for the brine, you just keep adding water to whatever you've got them in, a non-reactive container of some sort, glass or ceramic or pottery. This is a large pottery bowl. Until they are floating, and you can cover them with something like a plate, like this. If I can get that in there without breaking it up. Oops, wrong way around maybe, I guess. Yeah, that's fine. And that will hold them under the brine once you've made the brine, so I guess that's just about the right amount of water. What you do now is strain the water off into a saucepan. Brine is a very simple thing. It's just the water that was on the shallots or onions and a half cup of salt. Pickling salt or kosher salt. You don't want to use regular iodized table salt. You see, iodine in the salt will turn whatever you're canning or pickling brown. These are going to be pickled in a very dark malt vinegar, so perhaps you wouldn't notice them turning brown anyway, but that is a pickling salt that I'm using. You bring it to a boil, which will fully dissolve the salt in the water, and then you allow it to cool some, it says. I don't know. I'll let it cool for 20 minutes or so, I guess, after I've boiled it, before you pour it over the shallots and put them under a plate again. So we'll come back. Brine has been boiling, and now I've let it cool for 20 minutes. Pour it over the onions, which I guess I've said in this case are shallots. While it was boiling or cooling, I measured them, and I have enough there for 3 pint jars, so I guess that will be nice. The next process takes 24 hours. You just put a plate on it to weight them down under the brine and let them sit at room temperature for 24 hours. The onions have been in the brine now for 24 hours. Just going to drain them through a colander here. I'm still saying onions, and what I'm dealing with here is shallots, but sort of rinse off some of the salt solution that's on the surface anyway. Let them continue to drain and dry while I make the just turn the flame on under the vinegar pickling solution, but I'll tell you what is in it, at least what the recipe calls for. The recipe calls for 3 cups of malt vinegar, a couple of bay leaves, a tablespoon of mixed pickling spice, a clove of garlic, and a couple of crushed red chilies. Well, I don't want to run out of liquid here. I've got 3 bottles to do, and I think the recipe is probably talking about 2 bottles. So anyway, I've used a full liter of the malt vinegar, because that's a little over a quart, and a little bit extra on the pickling spice. I think everything else I've sort of left as is. And they also say to put those spices, with the exception of the bay leaves, in a cheesecloth bag, and that way they're easier to remove. But I never do that. I strain it through a strainer into another saucepan, and don't have to worry about making little cheesecloth bags. It gets rid of it all when you're doing the pickling. So I'll come back when this has started to boil. You let it boil for a minute or so, and then let it simmer for another 5 minutes. It came to a boil, and then I let it simmer for 5 minutes. It's ready to be transferred into a larger saucepan, a stock pot here. It needs to be larger than the one that I was using, because the onions get returned to it for 2 or 3 minutes to simmer. And that works quite well. You don't have to fool around with any of the gauze bags or whatever. Just strain it out with a fine mesh strainer. And the onions go in this, the shallots in this case. Not for very long, just to simmer for 2 or 3 minutes, it says. I'll set the timer for 3 minutes and come back when we're ready to. Shallots have been in the vinegar for about 3 minutes now, I guess, simmering away, so it's time to put them in the jars. And the recipe now says about an optional addition, add a hot, dry chili pepper to each jar, which I will do because I like things hot and spicy. But these are Thai chilies, not my own. I buy them in a grocery store, not far from here anyway, a large chain grocery store, in these little containers fresh. But I keep that container in my refrigerator, these modern frost-free refrigerators. It dehydrates them naturally, and I get these lovely dried chilies. I still keep it in the refrigerator. I don't know why. I could put them in a jar now, but they don't go to waste. The ones that I use fresh are good, and then they dry like like the dry ones that you would buy, very, very well dried. Anyway, I will crush one of these up and put one in each of the 3 jars here. That one didn't get crushed. I'll have to bring it back out, I guess. Put crushed chili in each jar. And filled 2 of the jars already with the shallots. Oops. Hot jars too, just out of the oven. Now it's just a matter of ladling some of the vinegar, enough to fill the jar. Come back and show you when I've got all 3 done. Eating extra vinegar. I used, as I said, a full liter of the malt vinegar, and I had very little left over. I don't know, 1/4 of a cup or something left over, so glad that I did that. And that is the pickled onions pickled in the jars. Due to the high amount of acid, this is undiluted vinegar. There's no need to process these in a hot water bath or a pressure canner or anything. Just make sure that they all seal. You hear them click and the lid go down, indicating that they're sealed, and they're perfectly safe that way. Here comes the hard part. I have to wait at least 6 weeks, it says, before I can open them and try them. So they will go on the shelf with the rest of the preserves, and that is the end of canning for this season. Thank you very much for watching.